down there. Is it raining there too? Um, Not at all. Oh gosh, the sky is so dark here. I wonder what's going on. And that's from the rain. Are y'all experiencing any of the smoke from the fires? Because I know it's South Georgia, but it's y'all are kind of almost south. We still waiting on some folks. We are starting a new unit today. Um, it might be our last one because we only got 3 more weeks of school. So we might kind of hit and miss a few things. I definitely want to do the whole unit on fingerprinting, but we might uh, do a little bit on handwriting analysis and a little bit on firearms and not do whole units. But for today, if you will go to Canvas and, and pull up the unit on fingerprinting and look that over for a few minutes while we're waiting folks to come in. Right, and as always, look at the vocabulary, and this is quite a lengthy vocabulary list. And the words, some of these words are wonderful. But we are looking at fingerprint techniques. Now, last time we talked about DNA fingerprinting, so that we looked at DNA as the thing to identify. Now we're talking about real fingerprints. And so we are going to look at fingerprint patterns. So they have vocabulary here for patterns. And then I'm going to also get you all to do your fingerprints and submit that as an assignment. So we got a couple of things to do with this unit. So like I said, this may take us out to the end, but we'll see how we progress with this. All right, so if you would read this first overview for the next few minutes while I check on some things, and then we'll get started. Hmm. All right. So again, hopefully you have looked at that introductory unit. So we're going to watch this first video, and then we also have a gizmo that we're going to do with fingerprinting. So like I said, we got a few activities with this unit. If you haven't finished your Earth Day assignment, we all looked at that last week. We put it on the collab board. Everybody thought it was Alex, except one person who decided to be creative. And that was good because you justified it. You justified it. So that was good. All right. So we're going to change our way to looking at fingerprints. I can move that button out the way.
All right, welcome back. In today's forensics lesson, we're jumping into a new topic, and our focus today will be on fingerprinting. If you're in class today, we're going to do a little activity where we put our fingerprint on a balloon, and then we're going to magnify it, make it real large, and then we're going to go through and find some common minutia patterns and just kind of explore and look at our fingerprints. If you're not with us in class today, if you're watching this video from home, we're just going to move on into the lesson. All right, so I want you to look at this picture, and let's suppose that one of these identical twins commits a crime. And there's three pieces of evidence in this case. We have DNA, we have fingerprints, and then an eyewitness account as evidence in the case. So which of those three pieces of evidence would be useful? I want you to think about it. Now we know that in this case, identical twins share the same DNA. So DNA is not going to be incredibly helpful in this case. We also have eyewitness accounts, but that's not going to be helpful either because they're identical twins. So these two individuals look the same. But we do have fingerprints as evidence. So in this case, fingerprints are going to be useful because as we're going to learn today, the current theory says that no two people share the same fingerprint. All right, so I want you to take a look just a second at your own fingerprints. Just kind of explore, see what you notice. See if you have, if you can identify the different patterns, or maybe you have the same pattern on your fingertips. So do you have the same pattern on all 10 of your fingers, or do you have different patterns? Do you have any prints that...
I'm going to pause this so that you can actually take your hand and look at your fingerprints. And because like I said, we're gonna do a little activity with your fingerprints later on. Not with the balloon, but take a minute to look at your fingerprints because we are going to, because in the activity I am going to ask you what is the pattern that you see on your fingers. So take a look.
that are mirror images of one another. So when you hold your two pinky fingers up side by side and you compare the left hand to the right, are your patterns the same? Are they mirror images, or are they completely different? And what you'll find is there's just all kinds of differences. And if you were to do this with a group of people, you would all have different answers. Some people have the exact same fingerprint on all of their fingers. Some people have various patterns on their finger tips. Some people have mirror images. So if they hold up their two index fingers and compare their left to their right, they're mirror images of one another. Some have completely different prints. So this is just one of the ways that we can see that fingerprints are unique. We all have ridges on our fingertips, so that's what we're looking at. When I say look at the pattern, we're actually looking at the ridge pattern. And these ridges help us to hold and grasp objects. When we press these ridges against things, they leave an impression, and we call that impression a fingerprint. Fingerprints are just simply a reproduction of friction skin ridges, and they're found on the palm side of fingers and thumbs, and they can also be found on the palms and soles of our feet. And a visual inspection of friction ridges reveal a series of lines corresponding to heels, and we call these ridges. So that's the high point of the fingerprint. And then the low point, the valleys, we call those the grooves. So the ridges and the grooves collectively together help make our fingerprint. And the shape and the form of the skin ridges are what we see when we observe our fingerprint. Now, what is a fingerprint made of? The imprint of a fingerprint consists of natural secretions. So these secretions you can see from the picture come up through our sweat glands, and they're present in the friction ridges of our skin. And these secretions are just a mix of water and oils and salts. And then you can have some miscellaneous debris in there that mixes to, like dirt, or a lot of times makeup for people who wear makeup, that mixes in with the waters and the oils and the salt, and it just creates more of a print. So when we touch something, we leave behind a residue. We leave behind the traces of these substances in our dermal ridges. Now, fingerprints are not new to forensics. Since the early 1900s, detectives have used fingerprints to identify suspects and solve crimes. So even today, fingerprints remain one of the most valuable types of physical evidence in criminal investigations. And I put this picture in here because I think it's just so cool. This is an image of the first fingerprints that were taken in 1859. We don't really know the exact year, so that's why it says 1859, 1860. And they were taken by William James Herschel. Now, the origin of fingerprint identification is unclear, but we do know through archaeologists that fingerprints were discovered back in 1792 in clay tablet contracts. So even back in ancient cultures, they knew that fingerprints were unique to individuals, and they used fingerprints as a method of authenticating these official seals and legal documents. Now, fingerprints have changed a little bit in how we use them in forensics. So in 1879, Bertillon, a French anthropologist, created a way for criminals to, he took criminal measurements, like physical body measurements from prisoners, and he developed something called the Bertillon system. And this system was used to track and identify suspects and criminals, and he linked these physical measurements to their fingerprints. Now, this system was replaced later when the first murder was solved using fingerprints. But you can see in this picture here that this is an old fingerprint card from the very first murder that was used, solving fingerprints. And I am very impressed by these fingerprints. These are good prints. All right, Sir Francis Galton and Sir Edmund Richard Henry in 1888 together developed the classification system for fingerprints that we still use today in both the United States and in Europe. And this system divides fingerprint records into groups based on their patterns. So there's 3 patterns of fingerprints that we need to learn. We have loops, and we have whorls, and we have arches, and we're going to go through and look at some of those different fingerprint patterns just to make sure that we can identify them. So loops are going to enter one side, exit the same side. Our whorl patterns are going to be either a spiral that starts from the center part of the fingerprint and works its way out, or they're concentric circles. And then an arch is going to enter one side of the fingertip and exit the opposite side. Now, since Galton's era, fingerprints have become essential in forensics, and this is primarily because fingerprints provide us a unique and permanent method of identifying individuals. Again, it's never been discovered that 2 people have the same fingerprint, so fingerprints are unique to each individual, which is incredibly useful in forensics. Now, fingerprint experts have established 3 core principles that underline the uniqueness and permanence of fingerprint identification, and so I want to go through those 3 principles with you. So let's start with principle 1. Fingerprints are unique. Fingerprints are a form of individual evidence. We talked about that back in Unit 1, and this is because, again, no 2 fingers have yet to be found that possess identical ridge characteristics. The individuality of a fingerprint is not determined by its general shape or pattern, but by careful study of its ridge characteristics, and we call these minutia. So minutia patterns are the ridge patterns that we see, and there are some common ridge patterns that we see in fingerprints, and so fingerprint analysts have coined the term minutia to represent those patterns, and we're going to look at minutia patterns in a future lesson. All right, principle 2, fingerprints remain unchanged during an individual's lifetime. So fingerprints form in the womb, and the patterns are formed at the beginning of the 10th week of gestation, which is the time since conception. Fingerprint patterns are also influenced by the environment. So fingerprints are environmental. They're genetic, but they're also environmental. So once our ridge patterns are set, they remain unchanged throughout a person's life, with a few exceptions. Obviously, if you cut your finger really deep and your skin grows back, you might have a scar, and of course that will alter your ridge patterns. But for the most part, fingerprints remain unchanged during an individual's lifetime. Fingerprint patterns are genetic, but they're also environmental. We said that in the last slide, but this explains why identical twins would have different fingerprints. So they do have the same genetic information, the same genetic code, but because fingerprints are environmental and are often shaped in the womb, this explains why identical twins would have differing ridge patterns. All right, principle 3, fingerprints are classified by their ridge pattern. And again, we talked about this in a previous slide, but all fingerprints are divided into 3 classifications. So we have arches, we have whorls, and we have loops. And one of the things that I need you to make sure that you know, you learn, you get down in your notes, is that 5%, roughly 5% of the population has arch fingerprints. So having arches on your fingertips is actually very rare. 30 to 35% of the population has whorl fingerprint patterns, and 60 to 65% of the population has loop patterns. So loops are the most common fingerprint pattern. Now there's many different types of minutia patterns that appear on fingerprints, and again, we will look at minutia patterns in a future lesson. Today though, I want to focus on 2. So we have the core, which is the center part of a loop or a whorl. And so if you're looking at this fingerprint here, right in the center, where everything kind of comes together, we call this the core. And then you can have a delta. So the delta is just a point of divergence in the ridge lines. It's where all the ridge lines merge together, and it makes sort of a triangle pattern. So when we're looking for a delta, we're looking for like this triangular shape pattern in the ridges. And so you can see that here, the delta and the core. Now, there is something called a ridge count that forensic fingerprint analysts can use. This is a quantitative measure, which is super helpful when comparing fingerprints from a suspect to fingerprints from a crime scene. So ridge count just counts from the core. It's the number of ridge lines that cross from the core to the edge of the delta. It's a numerical value. So I might have a ridge count of 12 or a ridge count of 13, and that's just indicating that how many ridges I have, ridge lines that I have between the core and the delta. And again, this distinguishes one fingerprint from another. All right, let's practice, because we talked about the core and the delta, and here we have 3 fingerprints, and I want you to see if you can identify the deltas in these 3 fingerprints. So we're looking for the triangle region where the lines sort of merge together. In this first fingerprint pattern, we have a delta here. So let me go back. You see how this is the ridge lines sort of merge together. We have sort of this triangle shape. In the middle fingerprint, we have a delta here. And then on this final fingerprint, we have a delta just under the core, which is here. All right, let's talk a little bit about the 3 classifications of fingerprints. And we're going to start with loops. All right, so loops are a class of fingerprints that are characterized by ridge lines that enter from one side of the pattern. They're going to curve around and they're going to exit the same side. So you can see that in this image here. So this is a loop. The ridges are going to come in from the left. They're going to curve around and they're going to exit the same side that they entered. Now, we can have loops that enter from the left or loops that enter from the right. So here's how we're going to distinguish between the two. So if the loop opens towards the little finger, the pinky finger, we call it an honor loop. And if the loop opens towards the thumb, we call that a radial loop. Okay, so make sure that you're getting that down in your notes, because when you see a fingerprint and you distinguish it as a loop, or you identify it as a loop, you are then going to have to distinguish it as an honor loop or a radial loop. And the way you're going to know that is if the loop opens towards the little finger, it's called an honor loop, and if it opens towards the thumb, it's a radial loop.
These are all in Canvas. So when we finish this, we're going to go back to Canvas and look at these as notes. So just kind of listen right now.
All right, so let's take a look at some examples. So in this picture, we have loops that are opening towards the pinky. And I know that because it says the fingerprints are from the left hand. So if you hold up your left hand in the air, okay, and you imagine this is your fingerprints you've put on the screen, you can see the loops are coming in from the left and they're exiting the left. So they are entering and exiting towards the pinky finger. Okay, so if they're opening towards the pinky finger, we call this an honor loop. All right, let's take a look at this example. So in this example, we have a loop that's opening, is coming in from the right, looping around and exiting on the right side. It tells us that this is also a fingerprint from our left hand. So hold up your left hand. Imagine this is your fingerprint. You've touched the screen. You've left behind this fingerprint. So when you hold up your hand, this loop is opening towards the thumb. Okay, so if it opens towards the thumb, we call it a radial loop. All right, let's look at this one. All right, so this one, if you hold up, this says that this fingerprint is from the thumb of the right hand. So if we have a fingerprint that is pointing towards the thumb or is the thumb, then that is also a radial loop. All right, let's look at whorls. Whorls are a little more complicated. So whorls are a class of fingerprints that include ridge patterns that are generally rounded or circular. And we actually have 4 classifications for our whorl fingerprints. We can have plain whorls, central pocket loop whorls, we can have double loop whorls, and then accidental whorls. So let's look at some images here. Feel free to pause the screen, because I know if you're one of my students, you actually have to put this in your notes. So make sure that you get this down, because you're going to want to know how to distinguish between these different types of whorl patterns. But let's start with a plain whorl.
And again, this is in Canvas. So when we finish this, I'm going to direct you to go back and look at the notes in Canvas. So just watch.
All right, so a plain whorl is going to have one or more ridges that make a complete spiral. We call these concentric circles. So it's like a circle around a circle around a circle. Here in the plain whorl, we're going to see that we have 2 deltas. And if we were to draw an imaginary line between the 2 deltas, you can see I've done that with a red line. Then if the concentric circles touch or cross at least one of, or if the imaginary line crosses or touches at least one of the concentric circles, then we have a plain whorl. Okay, now we're going to also have, with the central pocket loop whorl, we're also going to have one or more ridges that make a complete circle, just like we did with the plain whorl. With the central pocket loop whorl, we're also going to have 2 deltas. But here's the difference. So if I find the 2 deltas on my central pocket loop whorl, and I draw an imaginary line between the 2 deltas, If that imaginary line does not touch any of the concentric circles, then that's how we know we have a central pocket loop whorl. So you can see here on the central pocket loop whorl, we have concentric circles, and this bottom ridge here is the last of my concentric circles. It doesn't touch the imaginary line, it doesn't cross it. So that's how I know I have a central pocket loop. Here I have concentric circles that come all the way down pretty low in the fingerprint, and it does cross that imaginary line that links the two deltas together. So this is how I know I have a plane whorl. In my opinion, these are the hardest to tell the difference between, but a little bit of practice, in no time you'll figure it out. All right, the double loop whorl is going to be two loops that wrap around each other, and oftentimes they'll make sort of this S pattern. So anytime you see a fingerprint with this S pattern, it's usually because two loops have sort of intertwined. In these fingerprints, we're going to see two deltas, and so this is a double loop whorl. Our final whorl is called an accidental whorl, and it's a combination of two types of print. So accidental whorls, this is my go-to if I just cannot figure it out. It's usually accidental if I can't pinpoint any of the other three, because an accidental whorl is like a hodgepodge of different patterns. And an accidental whorl can oftentimes have more than two deltas. So of course an accidental whorl can have two deltas, but if there's three deltas, that does eliminate plane whorl, central pocket loop whorl, or double loop whorl. All right, so let's take a look at an example here. All right, so here I have identified three deltas. So immediately I know if I have three deltas, this is going to be an accidental whorl. All right, let's take a look at this fingerprint. So in this fingerprint, it appears that we have two loops that sort of wrap around each other. So I've highlighted in yellow the two loops, and they're kind of intertwined. We also see two deltas. They're also highlighted here. So two loops that wrap around one another, two deltas. This is going to be a double loop whorl. All right, let's take a look at this fingerprint. So here we see concentric circles. So we know we probably have one of the four types of whorls. I've identified two deltas, and I've drawn an imaginary line between the two deltas, and I highlighted the outer portions of the concentric circles so that you could see that those concentric circles cross over that imaginary line. So when we have circles that cross over, ridges that cross over the imaginary line, we have what's called a plane whorl. Right, in this picture we have concentric circles. They stop pretty abruptly. They're centralized to the center of the fingerprint. We do have two deltas. If I draw an imaginary line between the two deltas, I can see that the concentric circles, the ridges, do not cross paths with the imaginary line. So this helps me determine that I have a central pocket loop whorl. All right, the last type of fingerprint pattern are arches. These are pretty easy to identify, but these are a class of fingerprint that's characterized by ridge lines that enter the print from one side, and then they're going to exit the opposite side. We have two types of arches. We can have the plain arch and then the tinted arch. A plain arch has a smooth, subtle, like rise and fall, and then our tinted arch is going to have a more distinct peak. I think about a plain arch as being like a little hill and a tinted arch like a mountain. All right, if you look here, we have a fingerprint. We have some pretty distinct rise and fall. We see that the ridge patterns come in from the left and they exit the right, the opposite side. So we know this is an arch, and we would call this a tinted arch because it is a more dramatic rise and fall. Here we have a very subtle rise and fall. We have the ridges coming in from the left and they exit from the right. So we can identify this fingerprint as a plain arch. All right, if you're in class today, we're going to do some more practice with exploring our own fingerprints. If you are watching from home, I will see you in the next lesson.
Okay, so you will see her in the next lesson.
In
Nope, we're not doing that. All right, so what I want you to do while I do attendance is to come back to Chrome to Canvas. If you haven't looked at the overview, please make sure you do that. But I want you to look at the introduction lesson here, and you'll see that she's going to talk. It talks about all the things that she was talking about, but she also talked about the anatomy of the skin. So there is another video that we'll watch next time that actually goes through what the anatomy of your skin that allows you to have different features to your fingerprints. So please read this section, and I'm going to do attendance. Go through the little timeline here. Gives a little history. So that's the same picture she had in the video. So this is why I said you didn't have to take notes because the notes are pretty good here. Okay, so give that a read, the introduction and this page. And okay, this is where she talk about all of the different things she was just talking about as far as um, type patterns on your fingerprints. All right, so give that a read, and I will be right back because I'm going to do attendance. Pay particular attention to those charts on types of fingerprints because you will be expected to, on your fingerprints when you do your activity, to identify the patterns, find the deltas, etc. That's will be part of your challenge in that activity. All right. Good morning. We're in Canvas doing reading the fingerprint unit. And you should be reading in Canvas. I'm looking at all these screens and everybody's not doing anything. You've been idle for like forever. Everybody should be reading, 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 reading. You will have an activity where you have to do fingerprints, so you need to be familiar with the types of patterns. This unit test will have pictures where you'll have to identify the patterns. So take a look, study, get familiar. All right, hopefully you were reading as instructed. So as she showed you in the video, there is a classification system for fingerprints. And she gave you all the loop, the whirl, the arch, and the description, the same character percentage that she told you in the video, that arches are 5%, so that's very rare. And then the different types. So you had 2 types of loops, you have 3 types of whirls, and you have the 2 types of arches. So this box right here is going to be kind of a guide for you as far as identifying your fingerprints. And then this little box over here will also be a guide for you to practice and knowing what a delta is and what cones are, etc. All right, so if you're on this page, when you hit the next page, this is where your activity, not your fingerprint, but the gizmo activity. So you click on that and you download the worksheet. And then you're going to go to, this one's interesting because you get to be a little detective. Okay, so in addition to looking at the different types of fingerprints, you get to actually solve a crime. So download this worksheet, go to the gizmo. So when you launch it, oops, hold on. Before you do that, I don't think I assigned it. All right, give me a minute. I got to class. There we go. All right, so it has been added. So, all right, so when you log in, it should be added to your class assignments. Okay. So again, you have some suspects. You have a crime scene. You have some information over here that you need to read. And when you are done with the activity, there's a quiz. Do not do the quiz until you're finished, because some of the information on the quiz is stuff that you gain by doing the lab. So please do that. Okay, everybody good? We'll check GoGuardian in a minute to make sure you're all there. Anybody not able to get into the gizmo, if it's not there, refresh your page, because I forgot to hit assign to your class, so it should be assigned now. All right, so yes, fingerprinting is there. I don't think we did this one up here, but we've done these two. All right, so fingerprinting launch and follow the instructions on the worksheet. So this is what we'll be finishing up tomorrow. So get started today, do the introduction. Some of you kind of skip. So prior knowledge, we now have prior knowledge because we've read our chapter and we've done watch the video. So you have your vocabulary up here at the top, all the words that you just used in the video and all the words you just read in Canvas. And you want to take a guess on A, B, and C. And then you want to do the warm up. So go through and do the warm up. So you don't actually get to the activity till you get here. So you should at least be able to get to page 1 today. Okay, we don't have a lot of time. Like I said, we grades for seniors, and we got a couple of seniors in here. I need to have all grades in by the 15th, I believe. Had my little sticker here a minute ago. So we want to make sure that you get all caught up on anything that's outstanding, anything that we do current. You need to make sure that if you're in class, please do what you need to do while you're in class and not just sign in for attendance and then take a nap, as some of you are famous for doing. So we're on the home stretch. Let's make it a good one. So everybody should be, let me know if you're not in Gizmo, if you're having trouble getting into Gizmo, download the worksheet first so you know what to do, and then follow those instructions as you go through the Gizmo activity. And so this is first of two activities. You're going to do this, and then like I said, you're going to do your fingerprints. So I'm going to get that fingerprint card ready for you and those instructions. But we're going to do the Gizmo first. Probably the other person. Let's see. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Why is that not admitting? All right. Good morning. Good morning. We're working on a Gizmo assignment right now. We're in the Canvas unit for fingerprinting. And I did save that video to your class playlist. So if you wish to watch that again, it is available. But for those of you who just came in, we are in Canvas. This is in the module in Canvas right behind the reading assignment for classification of fingerprints. Okay, folks, it's almost time to go. Hopefully you got started a little bit, at least on the first page on the introductory warm-up activities for the Gizmo. So tomorrow when you come in, you just go right to it and work on that Gizmo. Who done it? You've got your three new suspects to look over. All right. So you have a great rest of your day. I'm glad it's not raining there because it's definitely not a day to go out here. Pouring rain. All right. You have a great one, and I'll see you tomorrow.